The mist vanished in a single, silent breath, leaving behind a world reclaimed by nature. Stalks of grass rose like jagged, green skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the soil. Above, leaves the size of storm clouds blocked the sun, turning the sky into a dim, emerald haze. Jack stood on the edge of the vine porch, his fingers working the straps of his harness. He pulled the webbing tight until it bit into his shoulders, testing the tension twice. The gear was his only lifeline in a place where a single misstep meant being crushed underfoot. He checked the length of his pine needle spear, feeling the weight of the harvest survival pressing down on him. Every drop of dew syrup was a matter of life or death for the colony. He looked out into the vast, swaying labyrinth of stems. The wind whistled through the canopy, carrying the scent of damp earth and rot. He did not blink. He tightened his grip on the spear, his knuckles turning white, and stepped forward to the very edge of the wood. The mission had begun. Jack ducked through the doorway into the hollowed pumpkin. Inside, the space smelled of sweet rot and ripening pulp. Mary stood at the center, her blade buried deep into the side of a blueberry. The fruit was massive, a dark sphere that loomed over her. She pressed her weight into the cut, the blade sliding through with a wet, heavy sound. A thick indigo juice surged outward, pooling on the floor like a rising tide. She reached for a canteen, her fingers trembling against the leather strap. She caught his eye, her breath shallow. "The east wind is shifting," she whispered. "The giant wasps are hunting in the low canopy today." She handed him the canteen, her hand shaking so violently the water sloshed against the brim. Yesterday, a caterpillar grazed the roof. The entire structure groaned under the weight. It nearly flattened us. Jack took the canteen, his grip firm. He felt the floor vibrate under his boots, a rhythmic thrum from somewhere distant. She moved closer, bracing herself against the pumpkin wall. "Stay low, Jack. Keep to the shadows. If you hear the wings, do not run. Hide." She watched him, her knuckles white as she gripped the table edge, waiting for him to step back out into the reach of the sky. Jack stepped back onto the vine porch, the surface swaying gently under his boots. The sky above remained a dark, suffocating canopy of veined leaves. Without warning, the air pressure shifted. A low, guttural thrumming began to build, rising from a hum to a roar that shook the very foundation of the pumpkin. A massive shadow eclipsed the sun. Captain Thrawn descended, his body a blur of motion that sliced through the thick air. The wind from his wings hit the porch like a physical wall, forcing Jack to stumble back against a pumpkin wall. The creature landed, its legs locking into the stem with a sound like snapping timber. The impact sent a violent tremor through the floorboards, rattling Jack's teeth in his skull. The air whistled as the giant wings slowly decelerated, each beat still generating enough force to bend the surrounding stalks. Thrawn stood motionless, his massive head turning toward the porch. The vibration persisted, humming through the soles of Jack's boots, a constant reminder of the raw power now anchored just inches away. Jack tightened his grip on his spear, waiting for the creature to acknowledge his presence. The ground felt fragile beneath them, as if the entire platform might snap under the weight of the arrival. Thrawn tilted his head, his compound eyes reflecting the distorted image of the porch. "You are late, Smallfoot," the bee buzzed. The sound was a dense, rhythmic drone that made the air itself feel thick and heavy. Jack steadied his feet, the vibration still pulsing through his shins. He looked up at the massive insect, his knuckles tightening on his spear. "Are the paths clear?" Jack asked, his voice thin against the backdrop of the insect's presence. Thrawn clicked his antennae, a dry, sharp sound like snapping twigs. "No," the bee replied. "Soldier ants have swarmed the Watermelon Valley. They are aggressive today. The entire corridor is sealed." Mary leaned out from the pumpkin window, her face pale as she caught the news. "Is it safe?" she called out. Thrawn turned his head, the movement fluid and terrifyingly fast. "The valley is a slaughterhouse," Thrawn buzzed. "We will have to take the raspberry thickets instead." He paused, his wings twitching with residual energy. "It means climbing through thorns like rows of iron swords." Jack looked toward the horizon, where the green landscape suddenly seemed far more hostile. The mission had changed. They were no longer just navigating. They were entering a gauntlet where every step could be their last. Jack turned his gaze toward the horizon. Before him stood the raspberry thicket, a dense, impassable wall of interlocking stems. Each thorn was long, curved, and sharp, jutting out at jagged angles like a field of rusted blades. There was no clear path through, only gaps that promised to tear through anything that passed. Movement flickered in the shadows between the branches. A long, spindly leg reached out, testing the air, then retreated into the dark. Jumping spiders. They were masters of this terrain, silent and lightning fast. Jack looked down at his pine needle spear. He ran his thumb over the point, testing the edge against his skin until a bead of red welled up. It was sharp enough. He looked back at the wall of thorns, the scale of the challenge pressing in on him. Every instinct screamed that the route was a death sentence. He drew a deep, ragged breath, filling his lungs with the scent of damp earth and rotting vegetation. He did not look back at the pumpkin. He simply adjusted his harness, shifted his weight, and tightened his grip on the shaft of the spear. The danger was absolute, but the need for the dew syrup outweighed the fear. He nodded once to himself, his expression hardening into a cold, singular focus. The gauntlet was set. Jack remained motionless on the edge of the porch, his eyes fixed on the towering stems of the thicket. He could hear the low, rhythmic vibration of the insect waiting for him. Mary appeared in the hollow doorway. She did not speak. She simply nodded once, her jaw set, her eyes tracking the movement of his hands as he checked the harness one last time. The air around them grew still, the wind dying down, as if the entire forest were holding its breath. Jack looked at her, then back to the waiting insect. He stepped off the porch, his boots making no sound on the stem. He reached out and placed his palms against the rough surface of the bee's back. The muscles beneath his fingers tensed, bunching and rippling with potential energy. He felt the heat radiating from the creature, a pulse of raw power waiting to be unleashed. He shifted his weight, finding his balance on the curved, textured surface. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of what might happen if he failed. He looked toward the thorns one final time, his grip tightening on the spear. The bee shifted, a subtle tremor running through its body, and the ground seemed to fall away before they had even moved. Everything was ready. The world exploded into motion. A roar like a gale-force wind erupted as the wings beat against the air, snapping the silence in half. Jack was slammed backward, his hands digging into the dense, stiff fibers of the bee's back to keep from being thrown into the dirt. The ground dropped away, shrinking into a distant, blurred patch of green. They banked, the turn so sharp that the horizon tilted at a sickening angle. Then the raspberry forest swallow them whole. The stems appeared as thick, impenetrable pillars rushing toward them at terrifying speed. Thorns, each one the size of a long blade, whipped past them in a chaotic blur. Jack ducked instinctively, flattening his body against the bee's vibrating frame. Every muscle in his legs burned as he fought to keep his balance against the sudden, violent shifts in momentum. The air whistled, high and sharp, as they wove through the gaps. One miscalculation, one stray movement, and the thorns would slice through anything in their path. The forest was no longer a landscape. It was a lethal, closing trap. Jack kept his eyes locked on the narrow gaps ahead, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. They were moving faster than he had ever traveled, deeper into the shadows with every passing second. A flicker of movement caught Jack's eye, a shadow detaching itself from a leaf directly above their path. It was a jumping spider, its legs twitching in rhythm with their flight, 8 eyes locked onto their trajectory. Jack felt the bee beneath him ripple with sudden, sharp tension. Thrawn did not hesitate. The wings blurred into a golden shield, the drone of their flight deepening into a violent, resonant hum as he pushed for a burst of speed. The spider lunged, but they were already gone, swerving hard to the left. A massive, sticky web spanned the gap between 2 stems, vibrating in the wake of their passage. The threads snapped, clinging briefly to the air before falling away. Jack felt the G-force pull at his limbs as they banked into a steep, twisting climb. He braced his feet against the frantic pulse of the bee's muscles, his heart hammering against his ribs. The ambush had failed by a fraction of a second. They carved through the dark canopy, leaving the predator behind in the tangled shadows. The air grew thinner, the light shifting from green to a pale, golden glow. They had survived the strike, but the forest remained a gauntlet of hidden threats. Jack kept his spear angled forward, watching every leaf for the next sign of a twitching leg. The thicket broke open. Ahead, the forest floor gave way to a sun-drenched clearing where the daisies stood tall like ivory towers. Then, Jack saw it. A single perfect drop of dew syrup clung to the highest petal, shimmering with the intensity of liquid gold. It was the harvest they needed to survive, sitting just out of reach. Thrawn held a steady, rhythmic flight path, his wings humming a deep, grounding vibration beneath Jack's boots. Jack shifted his weight, slowly rising from his crouch. The wind began to scream in his ears, a high-pitched whistle that threatened to tear his grip loose. He ignored the vertigo. He ignored the height. He locked his focus onto that golden sphere of syrup. The bee banked, angling his trajectory toward the flower. Jack felt the muscles in the bee's back coil and tighten, preparing for the final push. He raised his spear, the tip steadying against the rushing air. His heart hammered in his chest, syncing with the frantic beat of the wings. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a projectile. The distance closed in a heartbeat. The flower swelled in his vision, the syrup droplet reflecting the world in miniature. With a final, explosive breath, Jack pushed off from the furry back and launched himself into the open, screaming air. The whirl slowed as Jack hit the pedal. His boots skidded, then bit into the soft, velvet surface. He lunged, his spear tip piercing the golden drop, and the syrup clung to the wood like amber. He steadied his footing, the flowers swaying beneath him, and looked back. Thrawn hovered nearby, wings beating a steady, rhythmic pulse that no longer sounded like a threat, but like a heartbeat. The forest floor was a labyrinth of shadows, yet from this height, the paths were clear. The terror of the giant ants and the grasping thorns had evaporated. Jack stood tall, the weight of the harvest in his hand. He looked at the horizon, where the light caught the tops of the stalks. They were no longer victims of the wind or the creatures that roamed the dark. They had learned the currents, the heights, and the hidden lanes of the wild. The fear that had kept them hiding in the hollowed pumpkin was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They were navigators now. With a sharp whistle, he signaled Thrawn. The bee banked, closing the distance, and Jack stepped back onto his back, ready to chart the way home. The mission was done, but the world had opened up, and for the first time, it belonged to them.